I have been the keeper of this relay tower for 11 years, and in that time I have sent 243 emergency beacons, received 412 routing confirmations, and logged one entry that I cannot put in the standard format because the standard format does not have a field for what happened. This is that entry. I write it now not because anyone asked. The incident has been officially closed in the colonial administration's records. The power coupling was repaired. The settlement on Merv Outpost suffered no permanent loss. There is a brief notation in the Vethani Relay Authority's Quarterly Digest, 3 lines, under Peripheral Incidents, column 4, that reads, Emergency beacon from Relay Tower KV Merv 9 received and acknowledged. Routing irregularity resolved. No casualties. I wrote those 3 lines myself, because I write everything here. I am the archivist and the comms officer and the tower maintenance coordinator, and on certain cold mornings, the person who carries the water up from the cistern because the pump is old and the heating element is older, and I have been requesting a replacement for 6 years. But the digest entry is incomplete, and I have been told my entire professional life that an incomplete archive is a failure of the archive's purpose. So I am writing the rest of it. Start with what the tower is, for the record, because the record should be complete. Merv Outpost sits on the eastern slope of a plateau on Merv 3, which is the third of 4 rocky bodies orbiting a dim orange sun at the far margin of the colonial spread. There is no military significance to this location. There is no mining significance, no agricultural significance, no diplomatic significance. There is a settlement of approximately 412 individuals who came here in 2 waves. The first wave 3 generations ago, following a survey classification that rated the soil acceptable for subsistence farming, and the second wave about 60 years ago, following a reclassification that rated the subsurface mineral deposits moderate promising, which turned out to mean low-yield feldspar with high extraction costs and moderate disappointing resale value. The settlement stayed anyway. People do once they have built something. I came with the second wave's administrative structure, not as a settler myself, but as a posting. The Vethani Relay Authority assigns keepers to peripheral towers on 2-year rotational contracts. Most keepers do 1 contract, possibly 2, and then return to more central postings where the equipment is newer, and the supply lines are shorter, and there are other people to eat meals with. I did 2 contracts, and then I applied for a third, and the authority approved it with what I read as mild surprise in the approval notice's wording, and then I applied for a 4th, and after that I stopped doing contracts and simply told the authority each year that I intended to remain, and the authority, having found no replacement who wanted the posting, was satisfied with this arrangement. The authority has never asked why I stayed. The honest answer, which I have given only to the settlement's senior administrator, a woman named Pilith Osa who has been running the settlement's affairs for 30 years, and who is not a person who wastes questions, is that I find the work worth doing. The relay tower on Merv 3 is not an important installation in the authority's network, but it is the only thing between 412 people in complete isolation, and the people of Merv Outpost have been building this settlement for 3 generations, and the ground here has a particular quality of light in the morning, the old amber color that comes off the plateau, and I have not found another place where the light looks like that. The relay tower serves the settlement's communications link to the Vethani relay chain. Without the tower, the settlement is isolated, not dangerously in calm weather for short periods. The settlement has reserves. The people here are competent and self-sufficient in ways that people who live close to major relay nodes often are not. But the tower is their thread to the larger world, and I am the person who holds the thread. I have held it for 11 years without dropping it. On the day of the incident, I was performing a standard calibration check on the beacon array. The array sends emergency signals through a focused carrier beam to the nearest relay node, which in our case is relay node KV7, approximately 14 light minutes from our position. The calibration involves cycling through the beacon's frequency register to confirm each band is operating within tolerance. Standard procedure performed on the first day of every third month for 11 years without incident. I have a form for it. I have a form for everything. What I did not know, what no one on my side of the incident knew, was that the beacon array on Merv Tower KV Merv 9 had developed a side lobe irregularity in its primary transmitter cone. Side lobe irregularities are one of the standard items on the maintenance checklist, and I check them, and I check them again, and I have been requesting updated diagnostic equipment for 4 years because the current kit is 12 years old, and its tolerance thresholds are calibrated to catch major side lobe deviations. Minor ones fall below the detection floor. This side lobe was minor. It was, by the technical assessment that the Vethani Relay Authority conducted 8 months later when they sent a maintenance crew for the annual service visit, a deviation of less than 2 degrees from the primary beam axis. Negligible, they said. Below threshold, they said. Could happen to any tower of this age with this equipment. The technician who delivered this verdict had the particular tone of someone reporting a finding that is technically exculpatory, while privately nodding that better diagnostic equipment would have caught it sooner, and I received it in the manner it was intended. What the 2-degree deviation meant in practice was that a small fraction of the beacon's transmission energy, the assessors calculated it at approximately 0.4%, was broadcasting along a side lobe that angled off the primary beam and swept a cone of empty space roughly 90 degrees wide. That cone, by geometry and orbital mechanics, happened on the day of the calibration check to include a band of sky where no Vethani relay infrastructure existed. Where, as far as I knew, nothing existed at all, just the colonial margin's quiet emptiness, and beyond it the wider dark. 0.4% of an emergency beacon is a very weak signal. In almost any scenario, it would have been swallowed by the noise floor of interstellar space and never detected by anything. In almost any scenario. The cascade failure happened at the 3rd calibration cycle. I was running the beacon array through its frequency register when the power coupling for the tower's main feed line, which had been rated stable at the last assessment, which had been listed on the pending maintenance queue for low priority inspection, which I had been told 3 times was not yet critical, discharged itself completely in the span of about 4 seconds. The smell reached me before the alarms did. A sharp, acrid odor like scorched insulation and hot metal, and then the board in front of me went amber in a cascade from left to right, and then the emergency system kicked in and isolated the tower's core functions to the backup battery circuit, and then the alarm started. I am good at my job. I have been doing it for 11 years. I did not panic. I ran the damage assessment. I secured the arc point in the coupling housing. I confirmed that the fire suppression system had handled the thermal event cleanly, and then I sat down at the backup comm station and thought clearly about what I needed to do next. This is the thing about being alone in a place. You learn to think clearly because there is no one else whose clear thinking you can rely on. The tower is mine to run. The problem was mine to solve. I solved the part of it I could solve immediately, and then I assessed what I could not solve alone. What I needed, which I could not provide for myself, was a replacement power coupling. I could maintain the backup circuit for 50 to 70 hours with careful load management. I could not repair the main feed coupling without parts I did not have. I needed a maintenance crew from the authority, and I needed them within a reasonable window, and so I needed to tell the authority that I needed them. I sent the beacon. It went to the wrong place. Not the whole beacon. I want to be precise here, because precision matters in an archive. The primary beam went exactly where it was supposed to go. It hit relay node KV7 squarely. And KV7 logged it and forwarded the emergency signal to the Vethani Relay Authority's regional dispatch at Sector Hub Velith. That process worked as designed. I received a routing confirmation from KV7 11 minutes later, No reply yet, just the automated acknowledgement that the beacon had been logged, and I began the work of rationing the battery and keeping the essential settlement links alive while I waited. The settlement did not know about the failure yet, not in detail. The links had gone briefly offline during the cascade, which the settlement's main comms board would have registered as a short interruption, and Pilith Osa would have noted it and would be composing a query. I sent her a brief message on the backup circuit. Main feed coupling failure, working the problem, links restored on backup, expect full restoration within 2 to 5 days. She sent back, understood, let me know what you need. She is not a person who panics either. What I did not know, while I was doing that rationing work and composing those messages, was that the sidelobe had also fired. 0.4%, 90 degrees of empty sky, and somewhere in that cone of empty sky there was a frequency dormant, as I would learn later for 30 years and 2 months, that the sidelobe's energy was strong enough to trip. The reply came back in 47 minutes. I was at the secondary monitoring station, running a load assessment on the battery cells, when the incoming signal alert sounded. I checked the frequency, and I did not recognize it. That was unusual enough that I sat forward in my chair and looked at it carefully, the way you look carefully at anything that does not belong in the pattern you know. The frequency was not in my current registry. It was not in the Vethani Relay Authority's standard band allocation. It was not in the Colonial Emergency Reserve. It was labeled in the Autologs identification field as an Earth Deep Survey Transponder Frequency, designation EDS band Foxtrot 7, and it had last been listed as active 30 years and 2 months ago. I sat with that for a moment. I know enough about the wider galaxy's communications infrastructure to know that Earth is a real place with real relay infrastructure. And I know enough about that infrastructure to know that it does not generally overlap with the Vethani colonial margins frequency allocations. And I know enough about my own equipment to know that I was not generating this signal myself, that it was incoming, that it had originated from somewhere external to the tower. I opened the signal and read what it said. The message was in the Galactic Common Standard encoding. My translation module handled it without difficulty. It was brief. It said, distress signal received on EDS band Foxtrot 7. Origin coordinates confirmed. Physical vessel confirmed, not relay artifact. This is ECV persistent question, Earth Terran Survey Service, Deep Survey Registry TSS 4471PQ. We are approximately 11 light hours from your coordinates. We are inbound. Estimated transit time, 18 to 24 hours at survey cruise, 9 to 12 hours at full survey sprint. Please advise condition of distress. I read it 3 times. Then I looked up ECV persistent question in the registry. The Earth vessel registries are publicly accessible through the Colonial Margin Data Exchange, which all peripheral installations like mine subscribe to because the Colonial Margin is, by its nature, a place where any vessel might come by. I had accessed them before, not often, but sometimes, when a ship's identifier needed verification for landing permission or supply coordination. I knew how to navigate them. ECV persistent question, registry number TSS 4471PQ, was listed as an Earth Terran Survey Service Deep Survey Corvette, commissioned at the Terran Survey Yards 34 years and 11 months before the day of my incident. It had a crew complement of 12 for its initial deployment, with a rotation provision allowing crew to be exchanged at deep survey relay stations for long-duration missions. It had departed its home port 31 years and 1 month ago on a mission designated as Deep Survey Corridor Foxtrot, which was described in the mission brief as a systematic survey of the outer colonial margin along a specific angular sector of the galactic plane, with an estimated mission duration of 8 to 12 years. 8 to 12 years. The mission was 31 years old. There was no decommission entry. There was no loss of contact entry. There was a single entry, filed 9 years after departure, that read, Mission status update Deep Survey Corridor Foxtrot ongoing. Crew rotation completed at Deep Survey Station Murin 12. Survey progress 38% of planned corridor. Estimated extension to mission duration, 1422 years. The entry was filed by someone whose name I did not recognize. The notation at the bottom said, mission proceeds per standard survey protocol. Next scheduled status update at 15-year mission mark. There were no further entries. I looked at the date of that last entry and I counted forward. The 15-year mission mark, counting from departure, would have been 16 years ago. The next scheduled status update had never been filed. The registry had not been updated since. I checked twice, using the full cross-reference search, to make sure I was not misreading the record. I was not misreading it. The last formal entry was from 9 years in, and after that, nothing. Just the single vessel identifier floating in the registry with no updated status, no reported position, no incident flag, no overdue flag, because deep survey missions have variable durations and the Earth-Terran Survey Service's tracking protocols for long-duration corridor missions are apparently based on this evidence, which I was now looking at directly, not what one would call rigorous. ECV persistent question had been out there for 31 years. It had filed one mid-mission update, and after that it had simply continued surveying in silence, and the registry had not noticed. I sat with all of this for a while. I have a habit, when confronted with information that does not fit the expected shape of things, of sitting with it until I can see the shape it actually is rather than the shape I expected. This takes time. The information I was sitting with was a distress beacon I had aimed at relay node KV7 had somehow reached a ship that had been out of regular contact for 31 years. On a frequency the ship had been assigned at departure and had apparently been monitoring ever since. And the ship had replied within 47 minutes because it had been approximately 11 light hours away, well within the colonial margin's outer edge, but deep enough that I had never expected anything to be there. The shape of it, when I had looked at it long enough, was this. The ship was there because it had always been there, moving along its corridor, doing its survey, and my sidelobe had found it the way a stone dropped in a particular field finds water, not because anyone planned it, but because the water was there. Then I composed my reply. I told them the condition of the distress. I described the power coupling failure, the arc point, the battery capacity, the estimated repair time if a crew arrived with the right parts, the settlement's current status. I told them, and I want to be honest, that I was uncertain how to phrase this, so I chose directness. I said that the beacon had been sent on the primary carrier to the Vethani Relay Authority's regional dispatch, and that I did not fully understand how they had received the signal, but that I had received their response and was grateful for it. I told them I did not know what protocols applied to this situation. I told them that if they had a reason they could not divert, I understood, and I would await the authorities' response through normal channels. Their reply came back 11 hours later, which meant they had sent it within minutes of receiving mine, accounting for the light time delay. It said, "Understood. We have the distress condition. Parts noted. We carry a standard emergency repair kit including power coupling components for colonial margin infrastructure, standard colonial Vethani spec. We are at survey sprint. Arrival estimate stands at 9 hours 30 minutes from this transmission. We will not require anything from you on arrival except a place to set down." Message ends. And then at the bottom, in a slightly different formatting that suggested it had been added after the main body was composed, a brief addition, not part of the formal reply structure, there was one more line. It said, "The sidelobe. We were listening on the EDS band because we always listen on the EDS band. We have been listening on the EDS band for 31 years. It has been quiet for most of that time. You were not aimed at us, but the frequency was open and we were there. It was enough." I read that last part several times. I understood it as a practical matter. The frequency had been open, the side lobe had reached it, the ship had heard. What I did not yet fully understand, sitting there with the tower's battery cells at 63% and the morning light starting to come off the plateau in its old amber color, was what the ship's 31 years of listening on a quiet frequency actually meant. I would think about that for a long time. I have been thinking about it since. But in the moment, I put the message aside and went back to the work of keeping the tower functional, because the work was immediate and the thinking could wait. I spent the 9.5 hours before their arrival doing my job. I maintained the battery circuit at minimum essential load. I kept the settlement's communications links alive, priority order, medical monitoring, weather grid, supply coordination, general messaging. I filed an update to relay node KV7 noting that I had received a response from an unexpected source, and that assistance was inbound, and that the authorities' crew was still needed for the formal repair certification, but the immediate situation was being addressed. KV7's automated acknowledgement came back without comment, because KV7 is a relay node and not a sentient being, and relay nodes do not have opinions about the provenance of your assistance. I also, in quieter moments between load checks and battery assessments, looked into what I could find about EDS band Foxtrot 7. EDS stands for Earth Deep Survey, which I had not known before that day. I found the specification document in the Colonial Margin Data Exchange's Technical Archive, which maintains historical records on communications infrastructure relevant to the margin's operations. The EDS bands are a frequency allocation made by the Earth-Terran Survey Service for long-duration survey missions. Vessels operating on corridors that would take them far from regular communication infrastructure for years or decades, maintaining a passive listening watch on their assigned EDS band, so that any signal that reached them on that frequency would be automatically logged and assessed. Passive watch is automatic. The vessel does not need to actively monitor the band. The ship's communication system flags any signal received on the assigned frequency and routes it for crew review. This means that a vessel can be doing other things, surveying, running its instruments, logging its findings, managing its routine operations, while simultaneously maintaining an open ear on its EDS band. The watch runs continuously. It runs whether or not anyone expects it to produce anything. It runs because the mission protocol requires it, and because the protocol requires it, it runs. The EDS bands are narrow and specific. They are not the Earth-Terran Patrol Service's emergency channels, which are different frequencies maintained for different purposes and far more widely known. They are not treaty frequencies or diplomatic channels or commercial bands. They are, as far as the wider galaxy is concerned, essentially invisible, old, specialized, maintained by a survey service that operates in the deep margins where most of the galaxy does not go, and not advertised to anyone who is not themselves a deep survey vessel on a long-duration mission. The Vethani Relay Authority does not monitor EDS bands. The Colonial Administration at Sector Hub Velith does not monitor EDS bands. I do not monitor EDS bands. Nobody in the Vethani colonial system monitors EDS bands, because EDS bands are Earth survey infrastructure, and the Vethani colonial margin is not Earth infrastructure, and the two systems have essentially no overlap in their areas of concern. This is why the side lobe mattered. The primary beam was aimed at relay node KV7, which is Vethani infrastructure, which responds to Vethani emergency signals through Vethani protocols, and it did. The side lobe went somewhere that was not Vethani infrastructure. The side lobe went somewhere that was not monitored by the Vethani system at all, not tracked, not expected to matter. A slice of sky that the Vethani colonial margin did not have reason to care about, and found the one frequency in that slice of sky that belonged to something that was listening. I found in the frequency allocation records the date EDS band Foxtrot 7 had been assigned to Deep Survey Corridor Foxtrot. It was the same date as the mission's departure, which meant it was the same date as the last recorded active status of the frequency. For 31 years, ECV Persistent Question had been the only vessel listening on EDS band Foxtrot 7. For 31 years, no one had transmitted on that frequency, because the only mission assigned to it was the one that had gone out and kept going. The frequency had been functionally dormant from the outside, no traffic, no registry updates, no record of use, while from the inside of it, one old survey corvette had been keeping watch without interruption for 3 decades. I filed that information in my notes. I did not know what to do with it yet. I sat with it the way you sit with something that is too large to put down and too heavy to carry comfortably, and I finished my load assessment, and I sent Pilith Osa an update saying assistance was inbound and estimated arrival was the following morning, and she replied asking no questions and simply saying, "Good." I sent her one additional message after that, which was not strictly necessary for the operational situation but which I sent anyway, because Pilith Osa has been running this settlement for 30 years, and in my experience she is someone who handles information about the world without distortion, and I found I wanted to tell someone who would receive it that way. I told her that the response had not come from the authority. I told her it had come from an Earth survey vessel that had been on a deep survey mission for 31 years. I told her it was currently 11 light hours away and inbound, and that it was carrying the parts and the personnel to fix the coupling. She was quiet for a few minutes, the kind of quiet that comes when someone is sitting with something rather than formulating a response. Then she sent back, "How long have they been out there?" I told her 31 years. She sent back, "And they are coming here." I said, "Yes." She sent back 3 words, "Good people then." And then she closed the message because she had a settlement to run and the fact had been registered, and that was sufficient. I thought about those 3 words for a while. Good people then, it is a plain judgment and a complete one. What she was saying is not that she had assessed the individuals because she had not met them. What she was saying is that a set of facts about how they had behaved over 31 years added up in her estimation to a legible thing. They went out. They kept going. They kept listening. They came when something reached them. Good people then. I have been sitting with that judgment ever since, and I find it holds. Then I went asleep for 5 hours, because I would need to be functional when they arrived, and there was nothing more I could do for the tower until then. It came in at the edge of dawn, by the local time, which was coincidence but felt otherwise. MERV 3 has a 17-hour rotational period. The sun rises slowly here, in a long pale progression that goes from deep indigo to a dusty amber that the settlers call the old color, not poetic, just descriptive, the way people on the colonial margin tend to name things. The tower stands on the eastern slope of the plateau, and the eastern slope catches the first light, and I was standing at the tower's outer observation platform when I saw the drive bloom in the sky to the northwest. Survey corvettes are not large vessels. ECV Persistent Question was, by the registry specifications, a Class 4 long-range survey corvette, approximately the size of a large colonial transport with significantly more sophisticated sensor equipment and considerably less cargo capacity. She was built for endurance and range rather than speed or power. A vessel designed to go a long way and stay for a long time, not to arrive quickly or fight anything. The drive bloom I saw in the pre-dawn sky was modest, a warm amber-orange light that brightened and then steadied as the vessel came into orbital approach, moving with the unhurried precision of a crew that knows exactly where it is going and is not performing the arrival for anyone's benefit. I watched it come in. I have watched many vessels come in over 11 years. Supply transports, maintenance crews, the occasional colonial administrator on inspection. The rare survey team doing geological assessment work on the plateau's upper face. Every vessel has a cadence to its approach, a rhythm that tells you something about the crew, about how long they have been doing this, about whether they are confident or cautious or simply competent. ECV Persistent Question came in with the cadence of something very old that is very used to moving through unfamiliar terrain. neither hurried nor stalled, navigating the approach path with the quiet confidence of a crew that has been landing in difficult places for 3 decades and knows what the ground looks like when you get there. She sat down on the flat area north of the tower, in the cleared space I maintain for supply transports. The landing pads extended with a mechanical precision that seemed more careful than necessary for the ground conditions. She was settling herself into the soil of Merv 3 with the deliberateness of something that means to stay put for a while, that is not rushing this particular step. The hull, when the dawn light reached it, was the kind of weathered I have only seen on very old ships and very old equipment, not damaged, not neglected, but lived in every surface. Scorch marks from atmospheric entries on a dozen worlds, panel seams that had been resealed more than once. The survey service insignia on the hull side was visible but pale, the paint oxidized to a quieter version of its original color. The ramp came down. The captain was the first one out. She was a human woman of some years. I am not skilled at estimating human ages, and humans age at rates that vary considerably based on their individual biology and their life's particular circumstances. So I will say only that she had the look of someone for whom the passage of time has been a form of education, rather than a form of wearing down. She carried herself with the steady unhurriedness of someone who has long ago stopped being in a hurry and found the work better for it. She was wearing survey kit, practical and worn, with the Earth Terran Survey Service insignia on the left shoulder in the faded form that indicates long service. The dye in those insignia bleaches with light exposure, and hers had been exposed to a great deal of it, on a great many worlds, over a great many years. She was carrying a tablet in her right hand and a diagnostic tool in her left, and she walked across the flat ground toward the tower door with the stride of someone who has done this before in many different versions, arrived somewhere that needed help, assessed the situation, addressed it, and who is not performing the competence but simply exercising it. I met her at the tower door. She said her name, Captain Ira Vaughn, and she held out her hand in the earth greeting gesture which I know and can reciprocate, and I took it. Her grip was firm and brief and professional. No ceremony in it, no excess pressure, just a completed handshake. She said, "We received your distress condition." She said, "Power coupling cascade, arc point in the main feed line." She said, "We have a standard repair kit with the components you need, and 2 of my crew are engineers who have worked on colonial margin infrastructure of this type, and if you can show us the coupling housing, they can have an assessment done in the hour." I said yes. I said, "I am Darvith Sauls, tower keeper and archivist." I said, "I am grateful for your response." I said, and this came out a little awkwardly because I was not sure how to phrase it without seeming to imply complaint or confusion about her decision to come. I said, "I did not know the frequency would reach you." She looked at me with an expression I found, at the time, slightly difficult to read. I have thought about it since. I think what the expression was is this: the quiet recognition of someone who has spent a long time in a place where no one expects you to be, doing work that no one is tracking very closely, and who is not resentful of that, and who is simply present in the moment of its being acknowledged. Not pride. Not patience, exactly. Something more settled than either of those. She said, "It reached us." She said, "That is what it was for." Then she moved past me into the tower, and her 2 engineers came off the ramp behind her with the equipment cases, and they got to work. I want to describe the engineers briefly, for completeness, because they are part of the record. Their names were Corvest and Rilla. I did not ask their full names, and they did not offer them, which is the kind of mutual understanding that develops naturally when the relevant information is the work, and the work is clear. Corvest was older, dark-skinned with close-cropped white hair, and he moved around the coupling housing with the efficiency of someone who has repaired many power couplings in many different installations, and finds them all essentially similar under their surface differences. Rilla was younger, with the kind of patient, precise attention to detail that good engineering requires and that cannot be faked. She checked each component specification against the replacement part before she touched the housing 3 times, which is the right number of times. I have worked with many maintenance crews over 11 years. They come on the supply transports, 2 or 3 people from the authority's peripheral service roster, and they do their work and they leave. And the quality of their work varies in the way that the quality of any work varies when the people doing it are not invested in the specific place they are doing it. The MERV 3 tower is one stop of many for them. It is a posting they will be glad to leave, because the supply transport is uncomfortable, and the hours are long, and the plateau gets cold at night, in a way that the authorities' personnel are not generally prepared for. Corvest and Rilla were not from the authorities' peripheral service roster. They were deep survey engineers who had been on ECV persistent question for some number of years. I do not know how long. I did not ask doing the ship's engineering maintenance, and when the ship stopped at colonial infrastructure, doing that infrastructure's maintenance as well. The difference in how they worked was not in the technical skill, which was comparable to the authorities' better crews. The difference was in how they treated the coupling housing when the work was done. They cleaned the arc deposits with a thoroughness that went beyond what the repair strictly required, because they were the kind of engineers who leave things in better condition than they found them, not as a policy, but as a habit so old it no longer reads as a habit. They assessed the damage. They explained it to me without condescension. The arc had deposited conductive material in the housing cavity, which would require cleaning before the replacement coupling could be installed, and the cleaning would take time because doing it wrong risked a secondary arc that could damage the replacement. They would need most of a day. I said, take the time it needs. The repair itself took most of a day. Captain Vaughn spent part of that time supervising, and part of it walking the tower's systems with me, looking at what I had and what I maintained, asking questions in the manner of someone who is genuinely interested in the engineering of things, and not simply making conversation to fill the quiet. Survey people are, in my experience, interested in how things work. It is the nature of the work. You spend your years finding out how things work in system after system, and the habit carries. She asked about the sidelobe irregularity. I showed her the diagnostic record and the failure point in the transmitter cone. She looked at it for a while, the way an engineer looks at a thing before saying anything about it. Then she said, without any particular drama, that is a small deviation. She said, it would have been easy to miss. She said, 2 degrees is less than the tolerance on most detection equipment of this age. I told her that was accurate. I told her the assessment team had said the same thing 8 months later. She said 2 degrees was enough. I said yes. She did not say anything more about it. She moved on to looking at the battery circuit, and she made a note on her tablet about the battery cells and their charge curves, and she mentioned that they were carrying a set of cells in their spares inventory that were compatible with my spec and would upgrade my backup capacity by about 30%, and she asked if I would like them. I said yes. She had them transferred from the ship without making anything of it. At some point during the afternoon, when the engineers were in the cleaning phase of the coupling work, and I had a few minutes free from immediate tasks, I sat down with her at the small table in the tower's main room where I eat my meals and read my dispatches, and I asked her about the survey. She told me about it without hesitation. The way she talked about it was not the way people talk about hardship or sacrifice. It was the way people talk about their life's work when the work has been long and specific, and they are settled into it, and do not need it to be understood by anyone else in order for it to be worth doing. Deep Survey Corridor Foxtrot was, she explained, a systematic mapping of a particular angular sector of the galactic plane at the colonial margin. The corridor was approximately 90 light-years in depth and 40 light-years wide at the baseline, and it had been identified as a candidate for eventual colonial expansion, and therefore needed to be properly characterized before any expansion planning could occur. When the mission had departed 31 years ago, the expected survey duration had been 8 to 12 years. The survey models had been built on existing long-range observational data, which was the best data available, but long-range observational data for the deep colonial margin is inherently incomplete. What they had found 3 years in was that the corridor was significantly more complex in its stellar density and orbital mechanics than the models had suggested. More systems, more interesting ones, requiring more careful documentation. They had filed the extension request, the 9-year update I had found in the registry, and continued. She said, "We thought we would be done in another 10 or 12 years at that point." She paused. She drank from the container she carried. It was water, I think, though the container was old and worn enough that I could not be certain of its original purpose. She said it got more complex. I asked how much more complex. She said, "The corridor has 14 stellar systems that have not been previously catalogued at all, 4 of which have rocky bodies in habitable zones, 2 of which show geochemical signatures consistent with biological activity." She said, "Those take time to document properly." She said, "They have taken more time than we anticipated, but the documentation is worth doing right." She said it the way she said everything, as a fact, without elevation or complaint, simply the situation accurately stated. I said, "Are you going back?" She said, "Of course." She said, "We have 47% of the corridor remaining." She said it the way you say something that has no alternative, not with resignation, not with pride, just as a fact of the situation. "We have 47% remaining." The implication was that 47% was a job, and the job was ongoing, and the job would be completed. I said, "Your registry entry says the next status update was due 16 years ago." She did not look embarrassed. She looked thoughtful, in the manner of someone who has considered a criticism and found it approximately accurate, and who does not feel the need to defend themselves against accuracy. She said, "Yes." She said, "We had an exchange at Deep Survey Station Murren 12 at year 9, which is in the registry. After that, the next nearest exchange station was Station Colvin 5, which is 8 years from our current position by survey crews." She said, "We have been meaning to file an update at Colvin 5. She said, "We have been coming to Colvin 5 for the last 6 years, and each time there is a reason to continue the survey corridor before diverting." I said, "The survey service does not come looking for you." She looked at the wall for a moment, with an expression that was, I thought, something close to mild amusement, not quite, but adjacent to it. She said, "The survey service does not generally have the resources to go looking for long-duration corridor missions in the deep margin." She said, "They know we are out there." She said, "They trust us to file when we can." She said, "We have been going to file at Colvin 5. I did not press this. The picture was clear enough. A ship had gone out on a mission that proved larger than expected, and the mission had continued, and the reporting had slipped, and the ship had kept going because the work remained, and the survey service had either not noticed or not had the means to act on the noticing. And in the meantime, the ship had been out there, 31 years, doing its survey, maintaining its watch on its EDS band, listening to the quiet. I said, "Do you need anything? Resources, supplies, personnel?" She thought about it with the same unhurried seriousness she applied to everything. She said, "We carry a standard deep survey resupply complement, and we rotate crew at exchange stations when we pass them." She said, "The crew is in good condition. The ship is in good condition." She paused. She said, "The ship is in the condition of something that has been well maintained for a long time, which is different from new but not worse than new." She said, "We are adequately provisioned for the foreseeable continuation of the mission." She said, "We would not have diverted for anything we genuinely needed, because we do not go off course for ourselves. We diverted for you." I sat with that for a moment. The phrasing was specific, and I registered it as specific. They had not diverted for resupply or maintenance or crew exchange. They had not diverted because they were in difficulty. They had diverted because a signal had come through on their frequency, and the signal indicated a situation that needed addressing, and so they had addressed it. I said, I am sorry to have taken you off your course. She looked at me with the expression again, the quiet recognition. She said, you did not take us off anything, she said. You were on the frequency, she said. The frequency is what it is for. The engineers finished the repair in the early evening. They tested the coupling under load for 90 minutes, which is the correct testing period for a primary feed line coupling, and the coupling held cleanly throughout. The battery backup circuit recharged to full capacity in the 3 hours after the repair completed. I brought the tower's relay services back online sequentially, emergency band first, then general comms, then the full data links, confirmed that each link to the settlement was functioning, ran the standard diagnostic suite twice, and found nothing further wrong. The tower was operational. I told Captain Von this. She was already at the ramp, having supervised the cleanup of the worksite with the same quiet thoroughness she brought to everything else. She said, good, she said. You will want to request an updated diagnostic kit. The current one is too old to catch minor sidelobe deviations reliably, she said, and the battery cells we left you should give you 50% better endurance on backup, she said. The engineers left you a written assessment of the coupling housing condition. There are 2 secondary components they recommend replacing at your next scheduled maintenance, though neither is critical. I thanked her. I said this came out in a way I had not planned because it had been sitting in me all day and I had not found a way to set it down before this moment, I said. I looked up the frequency allocation. I said, EDS band Foxtrot 7 has been dormant in the registry for 31 years. I said, you were the only ones who could have heard it. She stopped at the ramp. She turned and looked at me. She said, yes, she said. That is generally how it works out there, she said. You go far enough and the frequencies get quieter and quieter and eventually the only thing moving on your band is you, she said. You stop thinking of it as silent, she said. You start thinking of it as available. I said, and when something reaches you on it. She said, then it reached us. She said, that is what the band is for. She said, 31 years or 31 minutes, if the signal gets there, you answer it. She went up the ramp. The ramp retracted. Her 2 engineers had already gone aboard. The vessel's running lights came on as the system cycled up small amber points along the hull that I could count from where I stood, the vessel's outline becoming a constellation against the darkening sky. The drive bloom came back, modest and warm. An ECV persistent question lifted off the flat ground of MERV 3 with the same unhurried precision she had come in with. And the bloom brightened and then began to pull away to the nor-northwest, back toward the corridor, back toward the 47% that remained. I watched it go until the light faded past the edge of the plateau. Then I went inside and sat down at my archive station, and I began to write. This is what I wrote then, and what I have been adding to since, as I have looked further into the history and thought more carefully about the shape of the thing. The EDS band Foxtrot 7 frequency was allocated 31 years and 1 month before the incident, on the date of ECV persistent question's departure. Captain Von's name does not appear in the original crew manifest for that departure, which means she joined the mission at one of the rotation exchanges. I have been able to determine from the single mid-mission status update that the crew exchange at Deep Survey Station Murin 12 occurred at the 9-year mark. If Captain Von joined at Murin 12, she has been on the mission for approximately 22 years. She has been listening on EDS band Foxtrot 7 in the deep margins quiet for 22 years, long enough that it is not a posting or an assignment anymore, long enough that it is simply her life's specific shape. I am 38 years old. I have been keeping this tower for 11 years, which is long enough that it is also simply my life's specific shape. I thought about that, writing this, and I thought about what it means to make a choice so consistently, and for so long that the choice stops feeling like a choice and becomes instead the terrain you live in. The Vithani Relay Authority sent their maintenance crew 8 months later, as I said. They replaced the transmitter cone on the beacon array. The new cone is built to tighter tolerances, and my current diagnostic kit can now detect deviations of less than half a degree. The side lobe irregularity is gone. My beacon now fires precisely where it is aimed, and the side lobe energy dissipates into nothing before it reaches anything, and EDS band Foxtrot 7 will not receive it again from this tower. I filed a note in the calibration record noting this, that the previous deviation was the mechanism by which the incident assistance had been received, so that the record is complete, so that whoever reads the record in future years will understand what happened and why the note is there. An archivist's reflex. The record should be able to explain itself. I sent a formal message to ECV persistent question through the Colonial Margin Data Exchange, addressed to Captain Vaughn, notifying her that the tower had been fully restored and that I was filing this archive entry. I included a copy of the technical record for their ship's log and a copy of this entry itself. I also included, because it seemed relevant, because it was part of the record, the frequency allocation document I had found, showing the date EDS band Foxtrot 7 had been assigned and last listed as active, alongside the mission departure date, so that she could see what I had seen. That for 31 years, hers had been the only set of ears on that frequency, because hers had been the only vessel assigned to it, and the frequency had been waiting the whole time with nothing on it but the patience of an open channel. The message is in transit. Given their current position, which I estimate from the drive Bloom's heading and the elapsed time since departure, the message will reach them in approximately 2 years. Deep survey communications are not prompt. That is understood and accepted. I do not know if they will reply. I think they might, when the message arrives, add a notation to their own log. I think Captain Vaughn would consider that appropriate record keeping. I think she would note the date and the frequency and the origin of the signal and the condition of the tower and the repair completed, in the same flat direct prose that her incoming message had used, and file it under routine detour and continue. What I want to put in this entry, what the digest's 3 lines did not have room for, what the standard incident report format does not have a field for, is this. I have been the keeper of this tower for 11 years. In that time, I have sent 243 emergency beacons. Every one of them went to relay node KV7, which forwarded them to sector hub VLITH, which dispatched the appropriate response through the normal channels in the appropriate time frame. That is how the system is supposed to work, and it works reliably. The Vethani Relay Authority is a competent organization, and its infrastructure is well maintained, and its response times are acceptable. But there is also this. 31 years ago, a ship left port on an 8 to 12-year survey mission, and it is still out there, and it has been listening on its frequency for 31 years in the quiet of the deep margin where the galaxy largely does not go. It filed one update 9 years in, and then it continued. It has been continuing. It has 14 new stellar systems in its logs and 4 rocky bodies in habitable zones and 2 geochemical signatures consistent with biological activity. And it has 47% of its corridor remaining, and it will not come home until it is done. On one specific morning, the geometry of the day was such that a 2-degree side lobe deviation on an aging transmitter cone aimed 0.4% of a beacon's energy at the wrong slice of sky. The wrong slice of sky happened to contain the one frequency that ECV persistent question had been listening on for 31 years. The signal was weak. It was 0.4% of a colonial margin emergency beacon, not a powerful transmission, not something that would have reached anything that was not already in the right place and already listening. But it was enough to register on a ship that was in the right place and had been listening for 31 years. They came, they fixed the coupling, they left the battery cells, they went back to their survey. I have tried to think about what the right word is for this, and I have not found one in any of the languages I read. There are words for coincidence and words for providence and words for the things that happen when preparation meets a moment, but none of them fit exactly. What it was, at the practical level, is a side lobe irregularity and an old frequency allocation, and a set of circumstances that aligned because of geometry and maintenance history, and the specific location of one vessel in the deep margin. What it was, at another level, and I write this with awareness that it may be more than an archivist should put in a record, is a demonstration of what happens when something keeps watching, keeps listening, keeps being present in the dark, long past the point where anyone expected it to matter. Captain Vaughn said, "The frequency is what it is for." She said, 31 years or 31 minutes, if the signal gets there, you answer it. I have been thinking about that. There is a kind of patience in what ECV persistent question was doing. A patient, sustained, open listening that is not quite vigilance, because vigilance implies an expectation of threat, and it is not quite hope because hope implies an expectation of something good, and it is not quite duty because duty implies an obligation that presses from outside. And what I saw in Captain Vaughn's manner and her crew's work was nothing that pressed from outside. It came from inside. It was something more like, we are here, the frequency is open, and if anything comes through it, we will hear it, and if we hear it, we will answer it, because that is what being here means. 31 years of listening to a frequency that was quiet. And then, one morning, it was not. I put the battery cells they left me in the backup circuit, and the circuit holds 30% better charge than it used to, and on cold mornings when the heating element fails and I carry the water up from the cistern, I am aware of that fact. There is a small label I made for myself on the battery housing. It has the ship's name and the date and nothing else. It is not visible to anyone but me. I did not put it there for anyone but me. The archive is for everyone who might read it. The label is for the cold mornings, when the work is what it always is, and the light off the plateau is the same old amber color it always is, and it is useful to have a concrete reminder that the frequency is sometimes open when you least expect it, and what is needed is simply to have been listening. The Vethani Relay Authority's Quarterly Digest has 3 lines. I have this. I do not know where ECV persistent question is now. I can estimate from heading and speed that they are somewhere in the deep corridor, 47% remaining, pushing forward through new systems and recording what they find with the same unhurried precision they brought to my repair. I know they are listening on EDS band Foxtrot 7 because they have been listening on it for 31 years, and there is no reason to think they stopped. The corridor's remaining 47% lies ahead of them, and the frequency is open, and they are there. I know they will come home eventually when the corridor is done. The registry will log their return, and someone will update the mission status, and the mission brief will be closed out, and the corridor will be entered in the charts. And the 14 new stellar systems and the 4 rocky bodies and the 2 signatures consistent with life will begin their long transition from survey data to colonial record. All of that work will happen. It will take decades. It is worth doing right. And one morning, sometime after that, there will be another ship that goes out on another corridor, and it will be assigned its EDS band, and it will leave port, and it will listen on its frequency in the quiet of the deep margin, because that is what it is for. I am the keeper of this tower. I write the records. I try to write them completely. The side lobe reached them because they were there, and they were listening, and they had been listening for 31 years because that is what they went out there to do. When the signal arrived, they answered it. That is the entry. The record is complete.